An elderly black woman, simply sharing homemade pies, was violently thrown to the ground and handcuffed by two seemingly untouchable police officers. They thought she was an easy target, just another statistic. But their public display of brutality was caught on camera, and their victim had one crucial, desperate call to make to her son, a Delta Force general. The aroma of warm apple and peach pies usually filled the corner of 145th and Plymouth on a Tuesday afternoon, a comforting scent that clung to Lorraine, a woman whose 72 years sat lightly on her. Though her hips sometimes disagreed, she wasn't selling, merely sharing, offering slices of homemade comfort to anyone who passed by St. James Baptist Church. Her folding table, scarred from years of loving use, held battered Tupperware and a thermos of sweet tea. This was her ritual, her silent testament that hope endured. Today. However, the usual murmur of the street gave way to a sudden, jarring halt. A black and white patrol car, Unit 211, screeched to a stop inches from her table. Two figures emerged, young, aggressive, and already bristling with manufactured authority. Officer Mathis, barely out of the academy, led the charge. His partner, Officer Crow, a hulking presence, shadowing him. "You got a permit for this." Ma'am Mathis's voice cut through the air, sharp and accusatory. He eyed the pies, then Lorraine, his gaze lingering with an almost palpable disdain. Lorraine, her movements measured, her voice calm, replied, "No permit." "Officer, I'm serving, not selling." Pastor Hughes and Councilman Mendez both signed off on it. She gestured vaguely towards the church, her hands steady despite the sudden tension. Her eyes met his, clear and unwavering. Mathis scoffed, a sneer twisting his lips. "Don't matter. Show me documentation." He took a step closer, invading her space. The implicit threat in his stance was clear. Lorraine reached for her purse, her movements deliberate, slow. She'd learned long ago that swift motions could be misinterpreted, especially by men like these. But even her careful retrieval was too much. In an instant, Mathis lunged, his hand clamped around her arm, a vice-like grip that sent a jolt of pain up her shoulder. He yanked, hard. The old table wobbled precariously, then crashed, sending pies scattering across the gritty sidewalk like shattered stained glass. The thermos clattered, scalding tea splashing across her hands. Lorraine cried out, a sharp gasp of pain and surprise. She hit the concrete hard, her cheeks scraping against the rough surface. The taste of metal and dirt filled her mouth. A searing burn spread across her palm where the tea had splashed. Gasps erupted from the few passers-by, now frozen in place, their cell phones already rising. Someone shouted, someone's recording. Before Lorraine could even register the full impact, Crow's knee drove into her back, pinning her. "Stop resisting," he barked, his breath hot against her ear. Resisting what gravity, getting old. She was a grandmother, not a linebacker. She croaked, "Let me call my son." Blood bloomed on her lip. The crowd began to coalesce, their shock hardening into outrage. Whispers turned to murmurs, then to outright shouts. The officers, seemingly emboldened by the gathering audience, continued their assault. Mathis twisted her arm, forcing it behind her back with unnecessary force. The clicking sound of handcuffs echoed, shockingly loud in the sudden, charged silence. She felt the cold metal bite into her wrists. "You people never learn." "Do you?" Mathis snarled, his face inches from hers. The casual racism in his words was a physical blow, cutting deeper than the fall. He hauled her to her feet, roughly, her body protesting. The weight of his grip, the public humiliation, the taste of her own blood, it all cemented a cold fury deep within her. They thought she was just another elderly black woman. They thought wrong. The power dynamic, momentarily theirs, felt like a fragile thing. The patrol car was a cage of cold steel and colder intentions. Lorraine sat hunched, her wrists aching from the tight handcuffs, the metal digging into her skin with every jolt of the vehicle. Officer Mathis, in the driver's seat, occasionally glanced back, a smug smirk playing on his lips. Officer Crow, Beside him was a silent, looming presence. They were taking her to the precinct, a familiar destination for many in her neighborhood, but one Lorraine had never imagined for herself. "You know, you could have just shown us your ID, ma'am," Matthias chirped, his voice dripping with condescension. "Made it easy on yourself." Lorraine, her eyes narrowed, fixed her gaze on the back of his head. "I told you I was serving, not selling, and you didn't ask for ID until you already threw me down." Her voice was raspy, but held a steel edge. The pain in her hip was a dull throb, but the fire in her gut was sharpening. Just then, a voice crackled through the patrol car's radio. It was the dispatcher, her tone urgent. "Unit 211, multiple calls coming in from 145th and Plymouth. Reports of excessive force. We have a growing crowd. Some recording." Mathis's smugness faltered. He exchanged a quick, worried glance with Crow. "Just a misunderstanding." "Dispatch." He mumbled into the mic. "Subject resisting arrest. Negative. Unit 211. Callers are claiming the subject was a little old lady and you assaulted her without provocation. We're getting visual confirmation of the incident through social media feeds. This is blowing up." The dispatcher's voice gained an edge of exasperation. "Lieutenant wants to know if you have a suspect name." Mathis's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Yeah, Lorraine. Just a second." He fumbled for his notepad, then finally found it. "Lorraine. Last name, Peterson." He paused, then added, "Looks like she's 72, Peterson, Peterson. A beat of silence from the radio. Then a sharp intake of breath. "Did you just say Lorraine Peterson?" The dispatcher's voice had changed, losing its professional detachment, replaced by a sudden, stunned disbelief. Mathis frowned. "Yeah, why?" Another pause, longer this time. Then the dispatcher's voice returned, tight with barely concealed panic. "Unit 211, I need you to confirm your location immediately. Do not proceed to the precinct. I repeat, do not proceed to the precinct. Rendezvous with Lieutenant Miller at the corner of Main and Elm. And handle this with extreme caution." Crow turned in his seat, his brow furrowed. "What's going on?" Before Mathis could reply, a new voice cut through the static, deeper, more authoritative. It was Lieutenant Miller himself. "Mathis, Crow, this is Miller. What in God's name were you thinking, Lorraine Peterson? Are you out of your damn minds?" His voice was a low growl of barely contained rage. "You just assaulted the mother of General David Peterson. Delta Force, the man who spearheaded Operation Phoenix 2 years ago. He's currently on leave, staying right here in town, visiting her." The words hung in the air, a sudden, suffocating weight. Mathis's face drained of color. Crow's jaw dropped. The casual arrogance that had defined their actions minutes earlier evaporated, replaced by a chilling dread. Lorraine, despite the pain, felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. Her son, David, a man whose name was synonymous with quiet, lethal efficiency, was not just a Delta Force member. He was the General David Peterson, a tactical genius and a man who protected his own with uncompromising ferocity. The officers hadn't just cuffed an old woman, they had inadvertently provoked a force of nature. The car, instead of speeding towards the station, now slowed, then awkwardly turned onto Main Street, heading not for booking, but for an impromptu, high-stakes meeting with their furious superior. The power had shifted, dramatically. The meeting with Lieutenant Miller at Main and Elm was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Miller, a man whose stern features were now contorted with a mixture of disbelief and fury, stood rigid beside his unmarked sedan. When the patrol car carrying Lorraine pulled up, the sight of her handcuffed and disheveled sent a fresh wave of outrage across his face. Matheus Crow Miller's voice was a low snarl, barely audible but vibrating with menace. "Release her." Now Mathis fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. The handcuffs finally clicked open. Freeing Lorraine's aching wrists, she rubbed them, her gaze steady, watching the unfolding scene with a detached intensity. Miller pulled Lorraine aside, his voice dropping to a solicitous whisper. Mrs. Peterson, I am so incredibly sorry for this. This is completely unacceptable. Are you all right? Lorraine met his gaze, her expression unreadable. I've been better. Lieutenant, my hip hurts. My hand is scalded, and I was thrown to the ground and humiliated in front of my neighbors for giving away pay. Does that sound all right to you? Her voice was calm, but the underlying steel was unmistakable. Miller winced. No, ma'am, it does not. I assure you these officers will be held accountable. He shot a venomous glare at Mathies and Crow, who stood rigidly by their cruiser, their faces pale. Just then, a sleek black SUV screeched to a halt behind Miller's car. The door swung open, and a figure emerged, tall, powerfully built, with an intense gaze that swept over the scene like a predator, assessing its prey. This was David Peterson, his short-cropped hair, the controlled fury in his eyes, and the way he moved with silent, coiled power, spoke volumes of his profession. He wasn't in uniform, but a black tactical vest peeked out from under his loose jacket. His eyes immediately found Lorraine, then the two officers. His jaw tightened. Mom, are you all right? His voice was low, dangerous. Lorraine nodded, a small, reassuring gesture. I'm fine, son. Just a little shaken. David's gaze hardened. He took a step towards Mathies and Crow. Which one of you put your hands on my mother? His voice was devoid of emotion, yet it carried an implicit threat that made the officers visibly flinch. Mathies, summoning a sliver of his earlier bravado, stammered, Sir. She was resisting. David cut him off, his voice suddenly loud, echoing down the street. Resisting what? Exactly, a 72-year-old woman with a bad hip. Did you see her as a threat, officer? Or did you see her as an easy target? His eyes burned into Mathies, who recoiled. Crow, attempting to de-escalate, interjected. Sir, we were just following protocol. She didn't have a permit. Permit for what humanity? David's voice was chillingly calm now. My mother has been giving away pies on that corner for years. She has the blessings of the church and the councilman. You think a lack of a piece of paper justifies this? He gestured to Lorraine, then to the smashed pies on the sidewalk. You humiliated her. You hurt her. And you did it because you thought you could get away with it. Miller stepped forward, placing a hand on David's arm. General, please. We're handling this internally. David shrugged off his hand. Internally, Lieutenant. With all due respect, I don't think you understand the gravity of this situation. This isn't an internal matter. This is a public assault. And what you witnessed just now is exactly what the public is witnessing. He nodded towards a cluster of onlookers, their phones still raised, recording every word. This is going to be national news by sundown. Miller blanched. He knew David was right. The image of a frail, elderly black woman being manhandled by two young white officers was a public relations nightmare, made exponentially worse by her son's identity. Officer Mathies, Officer Crow. Miller began, his voice strained. You are both suspended, effective immediately, pending a full internal investigation. Hand over your badges and weapons. Mathies and Crow exchanged a look of despair, then slowly complied. As they handed over their gear, David stepped closer to them, his voice dropping to a near whisper, audible only to the two officers and Lorraine. You should be thankful. Gentlemen, you chose the wrong target, but you have no idea how wrong. You made a public enemy of a woman who just wanted to share kindness. And in doing so, you woke up a force you never should have provoked. His eyes held a promise of retribution that was more terrifying than any shouted threat. The confrontation had ended, but the real battle had just begun. The power had truly shifted. From the uniformed officers to the quiet, formidable general and his wronged mother. The chaos at Main and Elm dissipated quickly, leaving behind only the shattered remnants of dignity for Mathies and Crow. Lorraine, her hands still throbbing, watched them hand over their badges, a silent victory in her eyes. David, however, wasn't done. He turned to Lieutenant Miller, his voice calm but his gaze unwavering. Lieutenant, My mother will require a full medical examination. Every bruise, every abrasion will be documented, and I expect a full, unredacted report of this incident on my desk by morning. Miller, clearly rattled, nodded stiffly. Of course. General, anything you need. Anything I need, David repeated, a dangerous edge to his voice. Includes the complete disciplinary records of Officers Mathis and Crow and every complaint filed against them, internal or external, for the last 3 years, he paused, then added, and I'll also require the name of the officer who trained Mathis at Crow. Seems someone dropped the ball, as Miller scrambled to assure him. David shifted his attention. His eyes swept over the small crowd that had gathered, many still holding their phones aloft. He noticed a woman in the front, mid-30s, with keen eyes and a professional-grade camera slung over her shoulder. She wasn't just recording, she was observing. Tanya, a local investigative journalist whose reports often ruffled feathers at City Hall, had been on her way to cover a zoning dispute when the commotion at 145th and Plymouth had drawn her in. She'd captured the entire, unvarnished truth. David walked directly towards her. Ma'am, he began, his voice polite but firm. You seem to have excellent footage. I'm General David Peterson. Tanya, though momentarily surprised by his direct approach, recognized the name immediately. Peterson was a national hero, a name whispered in intelligence circles. Tanya Sharma. Local news. Yes. General, I have it all. Unfiltered. She held up her camera, then her phone, displaying multiple angles. Her initial assessment was that this was a local police brutality story, but the revelation of Lorraine's identity had amplified it into something far bigger. Good, David said, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. We need to ensure this story doesn't get buried. The department will try to control the narrative. They will try to minimize. Your footage is critical. He looked at the other onlookers, then back at Tanya, and everyone else here with footage. Share it everywhere. His gaze was an unspoken command. Tanya nodded, a spark of professional excitement in her eyes. This wasn't just a story, it was a crusade. General, with all due respect, your word will carry weight, but a personal interview from your mother, describing what happened, would be devastating. And a statement from you, detailing the department's attempt to cover it up, would be game-changing. David considered this, then nodded. My mother will give a statement, and I will ensure the truth gets out. But we need a trusted platform, someone who won't edit, who won't spin. Tanya's eyes gleamed. I run an independent online news platform, The Unfiltered Lens. We specialize in raw, unedited footage and eyewitness accounts, no corporate pressure. No editorial bias will break this wide open. She sensed his hesitation. General, I understand your concern, but I'm not just a reporter. I'm a resident of this community. I've seen this before. It needs to stop. David studied her for a long moment, then extended his hand. All right, Ms. Sharma, let's make sure this isn't just another headline. Let's make it a turning point. Within the hour, Lorraine, having received preliminary medical attention from a medic summoned by Miller, who was now visibly sweating, sat in a quiet room at Tanya's makeshift studio, a repurposed garage, giving her account. Her voice was steady, recounting the indignity and the pain with chilling clarity. David, meanwhile, was on a secure line, not just with his military contacts, but with former colleagues in strategic communications, preparing a public statement that would hit with the force of a tactical strike. He also reached out to the councilman and Pastor Hughes, who were both horrified and ready to back Lorraine's story publicly, as the first raw footage of the incident, coupled with Lorraine's calm, powerful testimony, began to propagate across the Unfiltered Lens and subsequently picked up by larger, more desperate for content national news outlets. The local police department's phone lines began to melt down. Matthias and Crow's suspension, initially a face-saving measure, now looked like a paltry concession. This wasn't just a misstep, it was rapidly becoming a national scandal. The initial act of public humiliation, meant to assert dominance, had instead become the fusées that ignited a public uprising. The underestimated power of immediate, widespread public exposure, coupled with David's strategic precision and Tanya's fearless dissemination, had fundamentally altered the conflict's trajectory. The fight had moved from a street corner to the court of public opinion, and the department was clearly on the defensive. The fallout from the unfiltered lens exposé was immediate and cataclysmic for the police department. Protests erupted outside the precinct, fueled by the viral footage of Lorraine's assault and her calm, dignified testimony. Calls for police reform and accountability echoed through the city. Mayor Thompson, initially attempting to downplay the incident, found herself caught in a whirlwind of public outrage. She announced a hastily arranged press conference, promising transparency and a full investigation, hoping to quell the growing unrest. The press conference was held in the city's largest civic auditorium, packed to capacity with media, concerned citizens, and protesters still chanting outside. Mayor Thompson, flanked by Police Chief Davies and Lieutenant Miller, strode to the podium, her smile strained. She began a carefully worded statement, attempting to express regret without admitting fault, emphasizing the isolated incident and promising swift and decisive action. However, before she could finish, a familiar figure stepped forward from the media section. It was David Peterson, not in uniform, but in a sharp suit, his presence commanding. He held up a small, sleek device. "Madam Mayor, Chief Davies," he began, his voice cutting through the murmurs, amplified by a portable microphone he had clearly brought. "While I appreciate your attempts at damage control, I believe the public deserves the full truth." He pressed a button on his device, and suddenly, the massive screens behind the podium, meant to display city logos, flickered to life. The first image that appeared was a slow-motion, high-definition replay of Officer Matthias lunging at Lorraine. The moment of impact frozen for all to see. Gasps rippled through the audience. "This," David narrated, his voice steady, "is Officer Mathis assaulting my 72-year-old mother, Lorraine Peterson, without provocation." The next image showed Crow's knee pinning her, then Matthias twisting her arm. "Here, Officer Crow assists in pinning my mother, while Officer Matthias applies handcuffs with excessive force." Chief Davies' face was a mask of shock and fury. Lieutenant Miller buried his face in his hands. Mayor Thompson looked like she'd been struck by lightning. This footage was taken by a bystander, shared with a local investigative journalist, Ms. Tanya Sharma, who is here today. David continued, gesturing towards Tanya, who gave a small, resolute nod. "It directly contradicts the initial police report, which claimed my mother was resisting arrest." He then displayed a side-by-side comparison. On one screen, the police report, heavily redacted, claiming Lorraine was combative. On the other, the raw footage of her lying helpless on the ground. The contrast was damning. Furthermore, David pressed on, his voice gaining momentum. "My mother, as a direct result of this assault, suffered a fractured wrist, severe bruising, and a concussion." He paused, letting the implications sink in. And yet, despite the clear evidence of excessive force, these officers were initially given a mere suspension. No charges filed. No immediate public apology to my mother. This, Madam Mayor, is not an isolated incident. This is a symptom of a systemic issue within your police department. He then projected a series of internal emails, obtained through his extensive network between Chief Davies and Mayor Thompson, discussing strategies to contain the story and manage the optics, rather than addressing the core issue of police brutality. The room erupted. Chants of "resign" and "justice for Lorraine" filled the auditorium. "I also have here," David continued, his voice rising above the din, "the disciplinary records of Officers Mathis and Crow, records which show multiple prior complaints of aggressive behavior, racial profiling, and excessive force, all dismissed internally, without proper investigation." He paused, letting the shock ripple through the room. These officers were a ticking time bomb, and your department chose to ignore the warning signs. Your department, Chief Davies, allowed these individuals to continue to terrorize this community. Chief Davies, visibly shaking, stepped forward, attempting to interrupt. General Peterson, you are misrepresenting the facts. This is highly irregular. David turned to him, his eyes blazing. Misrepresenting, Chief. The facts are on the screen. The only thing irregular here is your continued employment. He then turned back to the audience, his voice ringing with conviction. The public demands accountability, not platitudes, not cover-ups. True accountability. And if this administration is unwilling to provide it, then we will ensure new leadership is put in place that will. The confrontation ended with the auditorium in uproar. Reporters swarmed David, ignoring the sputtering mayor-in-chief. The live broadcast carried every word, every image, every damning piece of evidence to homes across the nation. The public shaming was complete. The power had not just shifted, it had been violently seized and weaponized by the very people the department had sought to silence. The immediate aftermath of David Peterson's bombshell presentation was a scene of utter pandemonium. The press conference, meant to be a controlled damage limitation exercise, had imploded spectacularly. Mayor Thompson and Chief Davies, their faces ashen, were drowned out by the roar of the crowd and the flashing of cameras. Reporters, sensing blood in the water, surged towards David, their microphones thrust forward. General Peterson, what are your next steps? Do you believe Mayor Thompson should resign? Are you planning to file a civil lawsuit, David? Ever composed, raised a hand. My next step is to ensure justice for my mother and for every citizen who has suffered at the hands of those sworn to protect them. His gaze swept over the crowd. As for the mayor and the chief, that is for the people of this city to decide. But I will say this, an administration that enables and covers up such egregious abuses of power is unfit to serve. Just then, a commotion erupted at the back of the auditorium. Two uniformed officers, their faces grim, appeared, pushing through the throng towards Mathis and Crow, who had been sitting quietly in the audience, believing they were safe from the public eye during the official press conference. These officers were not from their precinct, but from the district attorney's special investigations unit, summoned by an emergency call from Lieutenant Miller, who, witnessing the unfolding catastrophe, had decided to cut his losses and cooperate. Officer Mathis, Officer Crow, one of the new officers, stated, his voice clear and authoritative. Despite the chaos, you are under arrest for aggravated assault, battery, and official misconduct. You have the right to remain silent. The announcement, though expected by some, still sent a shockwave through the room. Mathis and Crow, caught completely off guard, looked utterly stunned. Mathis, regaining his composure slightly, attempted to protest. This is ridiculous. We were acting in the line of duty. Save it for the judge, the arresting officer retorted. Already affixing handcuffs. The click echoed, a stark and satisfying contrast to the earlier sound of Lorraine being cuffed. As the officers led Mathis and Crow away, through a gauntlet of furious citizens and ravenous reporters, chants of lock them up and no justice, no peace grew louder. Chief Davies, abandoning all pretense of control, rushed towards the arresting officers, his face contorted. What is the meaning of this? You can't just arrest my officers without my authorization. The arresting officer merely glanced at him. Chief, we have a warrant signed by Judge Harding. This is out of your hands. Mayor Thompson, seeing her political career disintegrate in real time, made a desperate attempt to salvage her image. She seized the microphone, her voice trembling. I am shocked and appalled by the information presented here today. I assure the public that I was unaware of the full extent of these officers' misconduct. Effective immediately, Chief Davies is placed on administrative leave, pending a full internal review of the entire department. And I am launching an independent commission to investigate all allegations of police misconduct. Her words were met not with applause, but with jeers and boos. The crowd knew it was too little, too late. The public trust had been irrevocably shattered. Meanwhile, Tanya Sharma, her camera still rolling, captured every moment, every raw emotion. She uploaded snippets to the unfiltered lens in real time, turning the press conference into a living, breathing news event. The story wasn't just about Lorraine anymore. It was about systemic corruption, accountability, and the power of public outcry. Lorraine, who had been watching from a reserved section, a faint smile playing on her lips, met David's gaze. He gave her a subtle, reassuring nod. The first, decisive battle had been won, the arrest of Mathis and Crow, the suspension of Chief Davies, and Mayor Thompson's panicked attempts at damage control were not just consequences, they were signals. Signals that the power, once wielded so carelessly by those in authority, had irrevocably shifted into the hands of the people, galvanized by an elderly woman's unjust assault and her son's strategic precision. The public backlash had indeed begun, and it was a roaring wildfire. The arrests of Mathis and Crow, followed by Chief Davies' immediate suspension, sent shockwaves through the city's political landscape. Mayor Thompson's attempts to regain control were futile. Her press conference, meant to be a balm, had instead become a catalyst for further unrest. The public, now fully aware of the systemic issues within the police department, demanded more than just token gestures. David Peterson, recognizing the opportune moment, moved swiftly. He established the Lorraine Peterson Justice Fund, not just for his mother's medical expenses, but for legal aid to other victims of police misconduct. He announced, with Tanya Sharm by his side, a series of town hall meetings across the city, inviting citizens to share their experiences. The first meeting, held just 2 days after the press conference, drew an overwhelming crowd. The stories poured out of racial profiling, unprovoked assaults, dismissed complaints, and a pervasive culture of impunity. "This isn't just about my mother," David stated at the inaugural town hall, his voice resonating with conviction. "This is about a pattern of abuse that has been allowed to fester, unchecked, for far too long. We are here to dismantle that pattern, brick by painful brick." Tanya, with the unfiltered lens, became the primary conduit for these stories. She created a dedicated section on her platform, Voices of Injustice, where she uploaded raw testimonies, often cross-referenced with internal police documents that David's network continued to unearth. These documents revealed a chilling truth, a system designed not to serve justice, but to protect its own, burying complaints, suppressing evidence, and actively discouraging officers from reporting misconduct. One particularly damning revelation came from an anonymous whistleblower within the police department, a veteran officer disillusioned by the pervasive corruption. He provided David and Tanya with access to a classified database of internal affairs investigations. This database exposed a black book, a hidden ledger of officers with multiple serious complaints that had been deliberately downgraded, reclassified, or simply vanished from their official records. Mathis and Crow were just the tip of this disturbing iceberg. The Black Book contained dozens of names, some of whom had been promoted despite their documented misconduct. This information ignited a fresh wave of public fury. It wasn't just a few bad apples. It was a rotten barrel. David, armed with this irrefutable evidence, leveraged his connections to put pressure on state and federal authorities. He met with the state attorney general, then with a U.S. congressman known for his stance on civil rights. He presented them with the Black Book, demanding a federal investigation into the city's police department. Meanwhile, Lorraine, though still recovering, made several public appearances. Her quiet dignity and unwavering resolve became a powerful symbol. She didn't rant or rave, she simply spoke her truth. Her calm demeanor often more impactful than any fiery speech. "They thought I was just an old woman," she said at one rally, her voice clear. "They didn't realize I was tired. Tired of seeing this happen to my community. And when you make an old woman tired, you find out she has a lot of fight left." The pressure mounted. Advertisers began pulling their campaigns from local news channels that seemed hesitant to cover the full scope of the scandal. National civil rights organizations descended upon the city, Offering their support, the mayor's office became a fortress under siege. The narrative had irrevocably shifted. It was no longer just about Lorraine Peterson. It was about systemic injustice. The city, and indeed the nation, watched as a military general, aided by a fearless journalist and spurred by his mother's quiet defiance, systematically dismantled a corrupt system. The chaos, initially a liability, had been masterfully turned into an unstoppable momentum for change. The deeper corruption was not just being exposed, it was being meticulously laid bare for the world to see, piece by damning piece. The pressure intensified on Mayor Thompson, with the Black Book evidence now public and a federal investigation looming. Her political future was beyond salvageable. The town hall meetings continued, each revealing new layers of corruption. The city council, sensing the public's mood and fearing their own political demise, began to distance themselves from the embattled mayor and Chief Davies. The final showdown came in the form of a special city council meeting. Convened to address the mounting crisis, Mayor Thompson, looking haggard and defeated, stood before a hostile chamber. Flanked by her dwindling legal team, the council had called for a vote of no confidence, and the outcome was all but certain. Before the vote, David Peterson, accompanied by Lorraine and Tanya Sharma, was invited to speak. David took the podium, his posture unyielding. Council members, Madam Mayor, the evidence is overwhelming. We have demonstrated a pattern of systemic abuse, a culture of impunity, and a blatant disregard for the public trust within this police department. The Black Book proves it. The testimonies of countless citizens prove it. My mother's fractured wrist proves it. He then revealed the final, devastating blow. Furthermore, during our independent investigation, we uncovered financial discrepancies within the department's budget, specifically a slush fund disguised as community outreach initiatives that was regularly used to pay off silenced victims and discredit whistleblowers. This fund was authorized by Chief Davies and, with all due respect, signed off on by Mayor Thompson. He projected a series of bank statements and internal memos onto the screens, showing irregular transfers and suspicious expenditures. The room erupted in gasps. Mayor Thompson's face went white. This was a direct accusation of financial malfeasance, far more damning than just negligence. This was potential criminal conspiracy. Before she could form a coherent response, a new voice cut through the air. I can corroborate that. All heads turned. Standing at the back of the chamber, looking somewhat apprehensive but resolute, was Lieutenant Miller. He walked slowly to the podium, his gaze fixed on Chief Davies, who had been sitting stony-faced throughout the proceedings. I began documenting this slush fund over a year ago, Miller stated, his voice steady. I tried to report it internally, but my reports were suppressed when I saw what happened to Mrs. Peterson and then saw General Peterson take action. I knew I had to come forward. I have copies of every transaction, every signed authorization, every suppressed complaint. He laid a thick binder on the podium, its contents clearly organized and meticulously detailed. The revelation of Miller's betrayal, his calculated decision to save his own career by exposing the depth of the corruption, was the ultimate twist. Chief Davies, utterly exposed, slumped in his chair. Mayor Thompson, visibly shaking, knew her time was up. The vote of no confidence was swift and unanimous. Mayor Thompson immediately announced her resignation, effective at the end of the day. Chief Davies was formally terminated, his career, and likely his freedom, over. The city council immediately began discussions for a comprehensive overhaul of the police department, starting with the appointment of an interim chief from outside the current system and a commitment to independent oversight. Lorraine Peterson, walking out of the city council chambers, was met by a cheering crowd. She was no longer just a victim. She was a symbol of resilience, of unwavering truth, and of the profound power that an ordinary citizen can wield when pushed to the edge. Her simple act of sharing pies had ignited a revolution, and her quiet strength had dismantled a corrupt establishment. Months later, a new chief was in place, reforms were underway, and several more officers from the Black Book were facing disciplinary action or criminal charges. The Lorraine Peterson Justice Fund continued its work, helping other communities fight similar battles. David Peterson, having ensured justice for his mother, returned to his life, but his impact lingered. And Lorraine, often seen back at her corner, still sharing pies, was a living testament that sometimes the greatest resistance comes from the most unexpected places, proving that even a simple act of kindness, when met with injustice, can bring down an empire. She had not only survived, she had triumphed, becoming an enduring symbol of a community's resistance